Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Dental Marketing Secrets Podcast, episode number 120, Driving High Ticket Treatment, How to Attract More High Value Cases. I'm your host, Mark Thackeray, and excited to have you here with me today. We are going to dive into the science and art of attracting more of these high value cases. So things like all-on-4 implants could be, for some, it could be even more, Invisalign treatment. It could be cosmetic cases, porcelain veneers, or just dental implants, things like that. So there's a different type of approach that you need to take with this type of treatment. The problem that most dentists have when they're looking at this treatment is they treat it just like they would for a basic $99 cleaning. They focus primarily on the price and the transaction. And they really try and, the main issue is that they try and make the sale all at once. They put so much pressure on their one ad to do all the convincing, and for a case like this, for a bigger dollar amount case like these, and with some of them, if you get into the all-on-4, some of them can be, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 and up treatment. It's not a decision that you make just with a short ad, right? I mean, it's going to take some time. You think of it from the point of view of the patient. They're gathering information. They're trying to figure out what they need and what the options are like. And they're not just going to typically make that decision on a whim. But that's the problem that most dentists have, is that they approach it like they would for any basic transaction. Cleaning's very different in the sense that patients already know that they need to do that. You don't need to sell them on why they should get their teeth cleaned. It's something that's ingrained into them since they were a toddler. We talk about this in school. From an early age, it's the indoctrination has run its course. So it's not a hard sell. With something like these bigger treatment cases, there's a lot of factors going on, right? It's a bigger investment. And that's the reality of the situation. It's not necessarily a procedure. It is, but it's more of an investment. That's the way that you need to look at it. And that's the way your patient needs to look at it. It's not just a transaction, but it's a long-term investment in themselves. And for these types of cases, they require a lot of trust. It's a high trust relationship. You're not just selling the nuts and bolts. You're selling the vision of what their life could be afterwards. You're focused on that desired outcome that they have for themselves, and that's really what you need to drive at. That's really what you need to spend your time on, is helping them envision themselves in that desired outcome, experiencing that unforgettable smile, the ability to eat whatever they want, to the ability to speak up in public and take advantage of the opportunities that are there because of that. So it's really kind of getting into the emotional side that we'll talk about in a little bit. So that's really kind of, I wanted to set the stage with that the major change that you need to make is being focused on not just the transaction, not just this quick transaction, but you're really looking at it as a long sales cycle. So if we look at it, in most of these cases really takes 3 to 9 months, sometimes longer than that. They're not really it's not all about comparing prices for patients. They're managing things like fear. They're worried about the surgery. They're worried about, what if it goes wrong? What about, can I pay for this? Financially, is that something that's going to make me get strapped for cash for a long time? Is that going to, and they're weighing all these different things with that desire to change themselves, to invest in their future and invest in that desired outcome, in that dream come true scenario. So there's a lot going on. That's what I'm trying to get across. It's not just this quick decision. And as a result, you really need to look at it strategically and understand that it's a process that they're going to go from. So instead of maybe using things like, book your appointment now, which you can do, I think it's good to sprinkle that in to what some of your ads, some of your messaging, but also kind of focus on the learn more calls to action, because that's what a lot of them will be doing, is just trying to understand what their options are. Okay. And it's a good analogy is like dating. And I used this in an earlier podcast, one of my earliest podcasts actually, but it's such a helpful analogy because it explains exactly what the process and the mindset that you should take with these type of patients that are going for high value procedures like this. So when you're dating, right, you don't propose on the first date. Generally speaking, yes, there are some anomalies, especially here in Utah. You can hear some funny stories about things like that. But more often than not, the best course of action is you go and you meet casually. Maybe you double date. There's other people around. There's very low pressure. You're just trying to get a sense of the person, the individual, see if there might be some type of chemistry. And if so, it might progress to a lunch, something again that's not very, that doesn't have a lot of pressure involved, or doesn't feel like everything's riding on the table. So you kind of naturally progress in these stages. You maybe go for a lunch, and then maybe it progresses to a dinner, and then maybe eventually you date several times and then decide that you're going to go exclusive. And then typically months, sometimes years down the road, you feel comfortable enough to propose to someone and propose to spend the rest of your life with them, right? Contrast that with the approach that most dentists take with these type of cases, like I mentioned before, where they are really just trying to propose on the first date. And the patient is like, what on earth is going on right now? I can't believe that you just did that, right? I mean, that's the reaction that a lot of them have. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, I don't even know anything about you. I don't know if this is the right fit. They have all these question marks, and you're proposing that they spend, tens of thousands of dollars sometimes just like that. You can see why there's a lot of disconnect, and why a lot of practices don't get much traction when they approach it that way. But instead, if you focus it on the relationship, and using that dating analogy, that you focus on that end game, you're just really trying to get them to take the next step, and you're trying to help them along the way understand what it is what their options are, and how to make the best decision moving forward, right? So your job then becomes, how can I guide this person through this journey and offer them helpful tips, point out the things that they should know so they don't make a mistake, and help them gain some confidence in you and in the procedure so that they can make a good decision in the end. And the cool thing about that type of approach is that even if they decide not to use you as their provider, they are going to look at the relationship they have with you very favorably. Oftentimes, they'll even send you referrals just because you're the one who provided that resource and that value to them. You're the one who spent the time to educate them, to answer their questions, to make them feel good, and empower them to make a good decision. So you can see how that would reflect really well on you. More often than not, they'll go with you as the provider, but in the case that they don't, then they typically have a really good relationship with you regardless. So it's a great way to run your practice. It's a great way to approach marketing, because then you are what one of my mentors calls it's called, oh, now I'm blanking on the name, but Jay Abraham talks about it. It's the strategy of preeminence. You want to be the preeminent option, and someone who is preeminent goes out of their way to help their clients because it's in their best interest. They fall in love with their clients. They put them first and their needs first, and your business, in a sense, not that takes a back seat, but you're doing what's best for the client. In this case, you're doing what's best for the patient. So, and that's the approach that we're talking about here. So the next thing I really wanted to stress is going back to what we talked about, this idea of almost like a continuum, a journey, that relationship. If we're going back to the dating analogy, you want to look at it in those stages. So you think, okay, so what's naturally going to happen at first, right? Well, the patient has to become aware of the problem. So they have to become problem aware is what we talk about. So they have to understand that they have a problem. Otherwise, they're not going to do anything, right? You could be speaking to someone, you're advertising to someone about all-on-4 dental implants, and they're like, why are you looking at me? I don't have any issues with that. I mean, they might not even be aware. And that is game over already, right? That's a waste of time, effort, and money. And so you want to look at it in those stages. So you have to understand that the person first needs to become problem aware. They need to recognize that there's an issue, that there are things that they're feeling this pain. And once they do that, more often than not, they're going to seek out some type of solution, right? So then they start working to, okay, well, what are my options as it relates to resolving this issue? So if we stick with the all-on-4 dental implants, they have multiple missing teeth. Well, what are my options? I could get dentures. If I'm missing so many teeth, I could just get dentures. I could get a bridge. I could get, dental implants, or I could do all-on-4 dental implants, or I could do nothing at all. Those are all very viable options for a patient. Okay, so if you're thinking in terms of strategy, then one of the things that you could do is help them understand, okay, if you're in this situation, if you're feeling these type of issues, if you have multiple missing teeth and it's inhibiting your daily life, if you're lacking confidence, if you can't eat everything that you want to do, if you're afraid to smile at your daughter's wedding day, like these are all very painful things that go on all the time in the person's life. You're helping to kind of agitate that problem to the point where they're interested, it piques their interest. Now you present some of their options. You help educate them on what their options are, and that could be, well, you could go for dentures. You could go for a dental bridge. You could go for dental implants, or you could do nothing at all. You could totally just keep doing what you're doing and experiencing that pain. And most likely you're still going to be frustrated a couple years down the road. So again, you're trying to educate them on what their options are so that they can start to decide what's best for them. Okay. So that's, they're starting to gather information. They recognize they have a problem. They're starting to gather information on the various solutions out there. And now they're starting to understand, well, what are those solutions? How do they stack up one against another? And this is where there's a great opportunity from a marketing standpoint to call out those people. You're really the goal of your messaging should be to get people to raise their hand and say that they are interested. So just imagine that you are in an auditorium and you are trying to identify the people that would be right for your services. In this case, that is right for all-on-4 implants. So you're trying to call out what they need, or the problems that they're facing. And you do that by diving deep into the issues that they have going on every single day. The things that they face and those subconscious conversations that are going on in their mind, even though they might not ever share it with anyone. Like they hate looking in the mirror, all those things because of their smile. You dive into those, you're trying to get them to raise their hand. It doesn't mean that they're ready to pull out their credit card and go forward with treatment. All it means is that they have those issues and they recognize they have those issues. Okay, so in this case, from a marketing standpoint, this is a great opportunity to create some type of resource that gets them to raise their hand. Okay, it's again, going back to the dating analogy, you want it to be very low pressure. You don't want them to feel like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm ready for this. I barely know you kind of thing. You're trying to get them to say, yes, that is me, and I'm willing to learn about it a little bit more. So a great opportunity is to create some type of resource. Could be a PDF. It could be a video or a video series, something that helps them say, well, you've got these issues. Here are your solutions. Here are 5 things that you need to know, or here are your 3 different options when it comes to replacing missing teeth. Something like that, right? And then in exchange for their contact information, you provide them with this resource. And that does a couple of things. One, it helps them start to better understand their options, to get educated on what their opportunities are moving forward to resolve those issues. And two, it gives you the chance to build a database, to build a list of people who are interested. Those are the people that you want to be marketing to, right? You don't want to waste your time on those people that don't have any missing teeth or that aren't problem aware. These are people that have self-identified that they are having these issues. They're going through those pain points. So that's, kind of that next step in the dating analogy. And then you progress forward, right? You continually reach out to them and help them understand what their options are and what the next step is. Really what these people are starting to want at this point is they want someone to guide them through the process. Because they could try and do it on their own. They could go and scour the internet for hours and hours on end and hopefully piece together a strategy or start to resolve some of their issues or pave a path forward. But really what they would like to do is just rely on someone that they trust. And that could be you. You provide these resources and you do it candidly. You do it with the intention to help them and not to just pitch your product, pitch your service, pitch your treatment. You're doing it because you want them sincerely to make a good decision. And that's going to show, right? That's where you build that trust. And then they're going to look to you and say, well, okay, I understand my options. What's next? And you could say, well, here's why I recommend. Let's compare these. Here's your options. Let's compare these now. What are your best? Here's why I like this one. Here's why I like the dental bridge. This is where it comes into play. Here's why I like here's where dentures make sense. And here's where all-on-4 makes sense. And then you describe the type of person or the type of situation that best fit each of those solutions. And do it sincerely, right? You're not trying to get people that really are best suited for dentures, for example, to go with all-on-4 just because you want them to. You're trying to get them to do it because it's in their best interest based on where they see themselves, where they want to go with the outcome. If you want to deal with slipping dentures and clicking noises and all these things, this is why I love all-on-4s, is because you eliminate all those. Yes, it's an investment. Yes, it's expensive, but this is your life. Be sincere with how you're presenting this. Help them understand the gravity of the situation and what it's going to be like day after day if they choose a decision that's maybe not the best one. They have to understand the realistic consequences of their decision, positive consequences, negative consequences. They have to understand what their options are. Okay, so that's a great opportunity. Capture their contact information in exchange for some valuable resource. And then from there, you're building a list of people that are interested. And then you can, again, put yourself in their shoes, try and identify, well, what would be my next question? What would be my next challenge? What are some of the objections that you get? So the people they understand they have an issue. Now they're starting to see these are my options. And now they're leaning towards a solution. They're becoming solution aware, not just problem aware, but now solution aware. And they're starting to look for a provider. So what are the questions that come up at that stage? When they know that they're ready to move forward with treatment, now they're trying to figure out who's the best person, who's the best provider to do this treatment for me. Who do I trust? So next, your focus should be, how do I build that trust? How do I help them see why this makes sense, why I'm a good fit for them? Okay. And again, this is a great chance to speak to the emotional side of things. And I've kind of alluded to that throughout this conversation. And if you've listened to past podcast episodes, I talk about this a lot, but really diving into the emotional side of things, because we are emotional creatures. We buy on emotion and then we justify with logic. A good example of this, if I'm going to look at cars and I want to buy a Porsche, there are, more often than not, the reason for buying that Porsche is the image that I conjure up seeing a Porsche, driving a Porsche, having the perception of me owning a Porsche, how I see other people or how other people see me, or how I envision other people see me because I'm driving that car. It's more of the emotional side than it is the logical side. If I were to compare logically all the features of a Porsche versus, let's say, a Toyota Corolla, for example, logically, based on the price, based on the gas mileage, based on all these things, it might make more sense to you to get the Corolla. But because we're emotional creatures, because we kind of tell, we like story tell all the time inside of our head. We're seeing, oh, well, imagine me in this car and what people would think of, when they see me pull up to this and all these things. That's what we want to focus on. So we want to really dive into that emotion. And so that should show in your messaging. So that should show. And one of the cool things is when you do this properly, people feel like their situation better than they do. If you can understand that situation, if you can articulate and communicate that situation better than the patient, it builds instant trust because they know that you understand them. They know that you know what they're going through. And that is such a cool thing. Now they're really tuned in. They are locked in to what you are saying because they automatically assume that you have the solution. If you can describe their situation to a T, to the point where they think that you're inside their head, then they automatically associate you with the solution. So that's where, tactically speaking, your messaging needs to dive into that emotion. You need to focus not on the diagram of the dental implant or things like that, but it's moving more towards that outcome, the emotional outcome that they are trying to accomplish. They're trying to realize by going through with this treatment. So tired, things like, are you tired of choosing your dinner based on what's easy to chew? This is a daily pain point that they go through. This is something that they are battling with. It just irks them every single time. They wish, I wish I could eat whatever the heck I wanted to eat. I wish I didn't have to deal with this every single day. Again, that alone is going to hook them in. It's going to build that trust. So think of it. Always be thinking, how can I focus on the emotion? And then, yes, there are times when you inject those kind of features, the more logical reasons, because, people want to justify their decision, especially if they have a spouse, if they have someone else that, is going to be involved in this big high dollar decision, they're going to need to justify themselves. Right. And they don't want them to look dumb, because sometimes you feel stupid when it's just, well, I thought I'd look cool with this car, So you have to be able to justify that decision. So now hopefully you've been able to see throughout this, you've started with kind of a getting to know you. You move on to, okay, I think we're a good fit. We're starting to better understand each other. And now we're moving on to, I really start to trust this person. We're having a good relationship. We're going exclusive. I'm still using the dating analogy, by the way. And now we're ready for something a little bit more long-term. Hopefully that picture gives you a better idea of how you should approach these type of high ticket treatment cases, because that's what you need. You need this time to develop that relationship more often than not with these type of people, right? Because it's such a big decision. It has long-term consequences financially, personally, lifestyle-wise. So you need to build up that relationship. Now, I wanted to touch a little bit on the next thing that you're looking at, as you're really kind of diving into this. The more you can understand the patient, the ideal patient that you're going after, the easier this becomes. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that you need to understand their pain points like we just discussed, so that you can communicate them effectively, help the patient understand that you fully understand their situation. But also, very importantly, you need to understand where to find more of these people. You need to understand, where do these people spend their time? Where do they hang out? Where can I reach them or access them? Can I do that digitally? Can I do a physical approach? Can I do an offline approach where it's direct mail, or it's understanding where to really reach those people. Looking at the, so if you understand that more often than not, that these patients are 55 and up, they have, some of them are approaching, the best ones are approaching retirement. They're going to retire comfortably, but they have some of these issues. They've, kind of put this off because they've put everyone else first, their kids first, their spouse first. And now it's time. They're really starting to think about themselves. Maybe they live in a certain community. Maybe you can find more of them just at, the kind of over 50s community, something like that. Or maybe they're searching using specific phrases and keywords. That's another way that you can find them. Okay. So it's really diving into where to find more of these people so that you're not just spraying everyone, you're just, if I were to just dump thousands and thousands of postcards, I'm flying over the valley and I just dump thousands of postcards. Yeah, there's a chance I'll hit someone that's in need of what I'm offering, but it's not as likely. It's a lot of waste just to get a few of those people. Yes, you're still going to hit the target on a few occasions, but more often than not, you're going to miss it and you're going to spend, there's going to be a lot of waste. So the more you understand this audience, the easier it is to find more of these people, and the easier it is to craft that messaging that's going to hook them in and compel them to read more. So that's a big point in all this too, is just looking at the data. And this is going to take some work. You're going to have to look at, you have your past patient records. You're going to have to look into, just spend some time online. If you blog posts, you can look into forums or groups, Facebook groups, or, and then just start piecing together some of these. You could use AI, to help you. You could throw that into chat or into Gemini and see what can get. You want to validate that, of course, but just looking at, okay, what are the demographics of these people? What are the commonalities of each of these patients? How can I find more of those based on this information? So that's kind of the last main point I wanted to make in all this. But it is, just to sum up, it's a very strategic approach because it requires patience. It requires the ability to speak to people that are early on in that journey, in that patient journey, where they're just gathering information so that you can capture their contact information and you can nurture them along to the point that they're ready to move forward with treatment. Because we never know when a patient is going to be fully ready to move forward. We don't know. It's up to them. And you've seen this a million times in your practice. You're like, holy cow, this patient just decided today was the day. I've been talking to him about it for years, and now now I'm ready. And we just don't understand. There's some triggers that happen in their life that are outside of our control that propel them forward. And so our job, and we don't have control over those. So our job is to stay in front of them as best we can so that at the time that they decide it's right to move forward, you are there. You are right there next to them. They turn to you and say, I'm ready. And you go forward, right? So that's the way you should really look at this high ticket treatment, is a process. It's a relationship-driven process that's going to take a little bit of time. Yes, it's work, but these are high value cases. And imagine having built out a system that caters to people early on in the process, in the middle of the process, at the end of the process, what that can do for you as a provider. It's going to give you the best chance to convert those prospects into patients. And your return on that is going to be outstanding. Just looking at some of my clients, had one that he hadn't done really any all-on-4 cases a couple of years ago and decided that's what he wanted to do. And so obviously did the clinical side and did a number of courses, certifications, and then felt comfortable enough to start offering that. And that's kind of what we did. We built out a resource, a downloadable resource. We built out all the various assets that they could use on their website So if people just happen to come across their website, there's a lot of information, helps them understand. They could download the guide, they could get more. There's, other types of content that they can consume. And then you start building out the follow-up. Now imagine just having that in place for your practice all the time. It's just running behind the scenes. You're driving traffic and you see month after month. Yeah, it's not something that's going to generate hundreds and hundreds of leads every month. It just isn't. There's not as many people that are looking for that service in your area, right? But instead, imagine, what if it was 10, 12, 15, 20, 25 people a month that were opting in for your resource? And you look at that over time, and let's say it's 20 a month. Over a course of a year, you're almost 250 people that are on that list that have said, yeah, hey, I'm interested. I have these problems and I'm researching the solution. What are the chances, if you're following up with them every single month, what are the chances that some of them convert? Pretty darn high, right? Now imagine if you just continue to build on that list and you're continually following up month after month after month, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, and you have literally hundreds of people in this database that have said that they're looking into this. You're going to be converting more and more and more each month because of that. And that's how you do it strategically. That's how a lot of really big businesses are built outside of dental, inside of dental too. It's just on these bigger cases. It's your ability to capture them early on in the journey, nurture them along, and then be able to solidify that relationship through that content, through that showing up for them and being preeminent in the way that you approach that relationship. So it's a really cool thing to do. It does take time, but it's well worth the investment. If you're interested in that is something my team and I can do. Just reach out to Maria at markthackeray.com. But if you have questions about this and just want to bounce some ideas off, I'm all ears too. I love to be a resource wherever I can. So just hit me up, contact Maria either way. And hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time.